This Choircast podcast is brought to you by The Wages of Grace, a novel by Brandon Dragon. What is the worst thing a person could do to you that you could still forgive? This novel begs the question, is there any chasm that forgiveness cannot cross? And is there any wound that grace cannot heal? The Wages of Grace is available on Amazon, Audible, and everywhere books are sold.
Liminal. A word 1,000 miles wide but small enough to fit into the present moment. It describes an in-between place. We live most of our lives within this space, not quite ever arriving at our idealistic final destination. We spend so much of our energies on our best impersonation of who we wish we were, until we can't. But in sneaks a dark night of the soul, or perhaps a mystical experience. Our way of being has an error loop introduced. Today we call that deconstruction. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we teach you how to be here, how to traverse these spaces, and where we can go if we remain humble, open, and honest. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we explore the spaces in between, those transforming moments that challenge our perspectives and expand our understanding of faith, spirituality, and the human experience. And I am Tom Rundell, your curator of conversations. And today I've curated a conversation for you with Dr. Bruce Epperly. Dr. Epperly is a prolific author, theologian, pastor, professor, and spiritual guide who's written nearly 90 books on subjects ranging from mysticism to pastoral care. Now, a quick reminder that if you would rather watch this interview, we do have the videos posted on YouTube, so you can head over there and check them out and subscribe there. Now, Dr. Bruce Epperly is a theologian, pastor, professor who brings a unique blend of scholarly insight and practical wisdom to his work. He's got this deep passion for exploring the intersections of spirituality and everyday life that's going to really come out in our conversation today. Bruce's work touches on themes of mysticism, healing, and the importance of embodying faith in action. He's known for his ability to make complex theological concepts accessible and relevant to our contemporary world, and his insights have been a guiding light for many seeking to deepen their spiritual journey. Now, in our conversation today, we dive deep into Bruce's latest book, Homegrown Mystics, Restoring Our Nation with the Healing Wisdom of America's Visionaries. We explore how figures like John Muir and Maya Angelou can be seen as mystics, not only in their spiritual practices, but in their contributions to social and political life. We discuss the often overlooked political dimensions of mysticism, the importance of seeing the holy in everyday experiences, and how embracing a mystical perspective can help us navigate the challenges of our polarized world. From the ethics of climate activism to the spiritual practice of gratitude, Bruce offers profound insights that are both timely and transforming. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the wisdom of American mystics and the ways their insights can guide us in these uncertain times. Well, Bruce Epperly, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. Enjoying the heat of the Washington, D.C. area, staying indoors for it. So yes. I trotted out on my morning walk at 5 o'clock a.m. and then have been sitting around reading, writing, and watching a bit of British mystery today. So that's my life. I've been up 9 hours by now.
Wow, British mysteries. What are you into right now? Me and my wife watch them. So
well, almost everything, but one that I'm watching now is Signora Volpe. It is the woman who's on Silent Witness has a mystery with a little lightheartedness. What's her name? It's not coming to me. She's relocated to Italy. Another great show is one on French TV called Murders In. It's a series of about 14 years, 140 episodes or so, that each episode is discrete with different actors and actresses taking place in different parts of France. So you get a combination of a bit of the topography, geography, and culture of France, as well as a good mystery.
So that sounds fun.
But I'm a big fan of shows like Shetland and of course, the Sherlock Holmes, various incarnations of Sherlock Holmes and the Midsummers. And I mean, it is not a day go by that I don't watch one of those.
Oh, yeah, we've had a stint, me and my wife, where we watched just a whole bunch of those murder mysteries, and we specifically went to like the BritBox versions or PBS Masterpiece or just something along those lines, that it wasn't too little. It wasn't so graphic that it was kind of like disturbing, and it was still relaxing and
Well,
enough
yeah,
to
that's
watch it in
and
bed.
the stories are complex, and
Yes.
probably that has some theological reference, although they aren't always theological. Though uh, Inspector Lewis's sidekick is a former theology student, but but they just have some depth to them. And of course, anyone who studies theology has to see life as a mystery to begin with, and to live with the mystery and realize how much we can know and how much we don't know, and keep trying to get through the murkiness of life one step at a time.
Yeah, I like that. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to those mystery shows and storylines, because there's just so much that we don't know, but the discovery and the searching is kind of what I really enjoy.
Yeah, and certainly the Chesterton's original Father Brown
Yeah.
omnibus, they are just wonderful stories with a little theological twist to them. And the British Father Brown mystery has a wee bit of theology in it. I would live with a little bit more, but that's okay.
Yeah, I did enjoy
I don't need to
Chesterton's.
study theology in my off hours.
Yeah, I enjoyed Chesterton's Father Brown series. That was a really, really good series. We went to our local library and asked for it, and they had to go into like the archives in the attic and pull it out, because nobody had gotten it out. And
It's rather noir. It
yeah,
has a sort of Edgar Allan Poe feel to it, but for germane to our conversations today, it really does tackle not only the bright side of life, but the noir side of life, the side of life that's complicated and where people do make wrong decisions, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. Father Brown is in his own way a mystic, in his own way one who has a rare mysticism of. And we could devote a show to this sometime, Tom, of the theology of mysteries. Uh, I, I've thought occasionally of writing a book on theology of mysteries, or better yet, a mystery story. But I find that writing fiction is for me more difficult than nonfiction.
mm, yeah. I have tried that. It doesn't quite work. I'm still working on the nonfiction too. So
But we're still young, so we have miles to go before we rest, or as they say in the Harris Walls campaign, we work hard. There's enough rest when you die.
well, you are this prolific author, speaker, writer, teacher, professor, thinker, theologian. Um, how many books are you up to right now?
You know, I try. I think once those that are they're sitting in the oven at presses, and the time of sending a book in and a time of getting it published can range from 6 months to a few years.
Hmm.
It'll be close to 90, I think.
Oh my gosh.
And I've become one of those people who writes everything they think. The
Mm.
people we used to joke about in graduate school, so I become sort of a caricature of myself. I happen to like it. I happen to believe I write things that make a difference, at least to a handful of people. And birds sing, as I say to my wife, birds sing, and I write. And sometimes even the birds inspire my writing. Uh, there's a story about how Saint Augustine heard a voice coming from nowhere. It said, read this," and he found a book to pick up. And once or twice in the course of pondering a book, I've heard the birds chirping in the pre-dawn hours of Washington, D.C. suburbs, And it's almost like, do this. And it sort of has tipped me over the edge on projects. I don't know if the birds knew what they were saying, and nor do I know if this was a direct word from God to the bird to me. But, we're entitled to interpret these things.
Yeah, maybe the Greeks would say that they were the delivering the genius to you. That
well, yeah,
was deposited.
and certainly I think that takes a role of it. And I discover that freed from the constraints of having to write at this point in my life, I just simply like to. And if an idea really comes to me, I'll just walk with it. And a lot of the things I've written about have come out of studies I've led. The book we may talk about today, Homegrown Mystics, was part of a several-year monthly study I had when I was pastor of a historic church, South Congregational United Church of Christ on Cape Cod in Centerville, where I do a mystic every month for several years. And that has eventuated now in 3 published books and 1 on the way. So if you think about doing something like that, I had all these lectures sitting in my back pocket.
Wow.
And I decided, okay, let me just work on the lectures and try to figure out where they fit together. And they found a home in my mind, and then found a home in certain presses.
Now, I had picked a different book to talk about today, but then you said, but I've got this book, Homegrown Mystics, and it actually fits the direction of where I'm taking the podcast in the early fall a lot better than that. But when I saw the subtitle, it was kind of surprising. The main title is Homegrown Mystics, but then the subtitle is Restoring Our Nation with the Healing Wisdom of America's Visionaries.
Yes.
How did you put those two things together, where you have like this political bent, and going through the mystics almost as your lens to look at political reform or restoring the nation? I just wasn't expecting that.
Well, I think the political aspects of mysticism are often undersold and underrated. None of these particular people I talk about in the book was highly partisan in the narrow sense of the word that we use today, where, the red and the blue and never the twain shall meet. But they realized, and I think this may be at least partly an American phenomenon, is that they realized that they could be both heavenly minded and earthly good. And that what they thought about and what they experienced in the world, in terms of their more ecstatic experiences, also had a value in everyday life and their life as citizens, and perhaps even the life of the country. I talk about John Muir, who in many ways is one of the most important figures in American history as the parent of the national park system, along with Teddy Roosevelt. And lived in a time in which Muir and Roosevelt could go off by themselves in Yosemite and hike. No Secret Service, no one to watch them, just 2 fellows out there noticing the beauty of nature. Or Thoreau and the whole question of the value of each person, which led to his piece on civil disobedience, and the piece on civil disobedience was originally written to respond to the Mexican-American War, but it certainly had an impact on the Civil War. And of course, Thoreau's family was part of the Underground Railroad. So I think the American mystics and other mystics as well were more worldly than they're given credit.
And I don't think I would have labeled John Muir a mystic until I read your book.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool. You actually open up with this really cool quote from Vernon Howard that said, "Mysticism is not this or that particular cup on the table. It's the water poured into all of them." So how does that shape our understanding of what a mystic is? Let's give us a kind of a ground foundation here, how would you describe a mystic so that someone like a John Muir and a Thoreau are going to fit inside of that definition?
Someone who experiences the holy. Someone who experiences the holy, who sees something about the unity and wonder and beauty of life, whether or not it involves God. It's interesting. Mary Oliver, who I talk about in the book, has this wonderful line from one of her poems. Pay attention. Be astonished. Talk about it. And if you read John Muir or Henry David Thoreau, there's a tremendous amount of astonishment there. I mean, they could, as I'm doing right now, looking out into my little patio in our townhouse community and seeing the sunshine on the little bean plant that my wife has planted out there. And there's colors like none other. And a person could stop and admire those in the same way that, Mary Oliver spends an afternoon looking at a grasshopper. I think the wonder of life. Abraham Joshua Heschel has this notion that, and I believe he's right, that the religions originate from experiences of radical amazement.
I love that.
Another way of looking at it is Jacob, who's not by predisposition a mystic. Jacob is a fellow you wouldn't want to go into business with. Jacob is to some degree a con artist. There's a bridge somewhere in the Middle East you could buy from him, probably. Having said that, he lays down to sleep and has a dream, and the American mysticism really builds on this, of a ladder of angels. But what's interesting in this ladder of angels, the angels start on earth. You read the story, they start on earth, they go up to the heavens, and then they go back down, sort of a divine escalator. And, that's American mysticism, too. And, of course, Jacob wakes up and says, God was in this place and I did not know it. And the mystic is the one who discovers the divine or God, the holy, is in this place. And the American mystics I talk about saw the holy, and they're not alone in this, in the everydayness of life. And then they sort of rose to the heavens, not to leave the earth and not to abandon the earth, but to get a wide-scale vision of it. It's like seeing the holy here and then seeing the holy out here and everything, and then coming back and discovering that the holy you see isn't a runaway slave. And the holy you see is in a child struggling to do their math homework. The holy you see is a Jesus, Maria, and Jose coming up from central Mexico, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the Holy Family. You may still, if you're involved as a citizen, want an orderly immigration process, as I do, but you won't call those people thugs and thieves and mentally ill murderers because they're Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and Maria and Jose, and you sort of begin to see how you need to see things with a sense of reverence, even when you make hard decisions.
Now, you then kind of paint this picture for this mysticism is kind of like how we restore the nation. So connect the dots for me on how, having a mystical bent can then help bring about a restoration project or process for kind of where we're at right now.
Well, yeah, and would that there were more mystics probably involved in politics, and would that there be more citizens that took the deeper things in life seriously. But what I'm trying to do, and I work on this every day, to be honest, because there's a part of me that wants to divide. There's a part of me that wants to polarize. I know the good guys and I know the bad guys, and I want to assume the bad guys are all bad and the good guys are all good. I know better than that, of course. But the mystic has a sense, I'll use Howard Thurman as an example here, that each moment has holiness to it. Each person has holiness to it. And if that's the case, you need to challenge everything that keeps us from being fully human, while yet seeing the humanity of the ones you were challenging. I wrote another book on Howard Thurman's contemplative activism called Prophetic Healing, and I was exploring how you can be a prophet and a healer at the same time. And for Thurman, it was basically the sense that you'd see the holiness in the ones you're challenging, even if the decisions you make, like boycotting or striking or might cause some harm, and you wanted to minimize harm, of course, but you'd still see the holiness in a Bull Connor down south in Birmingham or Montgomery. You'd see the holiness in a leader of the Hamas, or you'd see the holiness in Benjamin Netanyahu. There is something of God, as the Quakers would say, in each one of us, and we have to give place for that. That's what seems to be missing now in the polarization. And while we can see it more graphically and more starkly among, I don't even know if the term right is a correct term or conservative is a correct term, but they'll call it ideological right. We can see it more starkly there, that polarization and demonization, but there's some of that in the ideological left as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's a sense that if your position differs from mine, even if you're one of my kin, and we agree 90% of the time, that 10% is going to divide us.
Yeah.
I think the mystics in action look for some common ground in our basic humanity. So that even though people like me who are of a progressive strain can certainly feel quite alienated from the person who's wearing their red MAGA hat, who's cheering at some off-color joke at a rally, there's something in them that's holy, and also there's something in them that's looking for some certainty or safety, some sense of something that's going to endure through life changes, and so am I. And
Mm-hmm.
to even those discussions are almost impossible these days. They won't happen if we demonize.
Yeah. Yeah. And the lack of space for those conversations is really hard when people on either side, it's almost like morally wrong to have conversations with the other side, because how could you even talk to somebody who's left leaning or right leaning,
Yes.
who's going to vote for so and so and so and so, and I feel it in my own body when I am on the phone with a longtime friend and politics comes up and they are different than me.
Yes.
I feel it in my body, this tension, where does that come from? That tension that just says, oh, an enemy has been, but then it's not an enemy, it's my longtime friend.
Yes.
And I'm sure the other people are feeling the same way, because, it's just such a touchy topic.
Yes.
Where does that come from? That tension, the immediate tension when you hear their politics.
I think it's fear. I think it's a fear of losing what we cherish, a fear of being wrong, a fear of, the stakes are high, so some healthy anxiety is a good thing when we talk about climate change, when we talk about the survival of democracy, when you talk about people being able to love who they love. I think that those things need to be protected, but I'm not sure that fear that's working out of the reptilian brain is going to help us do this. I think the mystics, although I didn't talk about him, I don't think I talked about him in this book, Thomas Merton. That's somewhere else in my writing. Channel the fear up to the spiritual. Channel the fear, and for us, I guess, for me, some of it involves again, as Mary Oliver says, taking the time to pause, taking the time not to be reactive. And this could apply for I have a teenage and a pre-teenage grandchildren. I'm very close to them. And one of the things that people need to do in relationship to teenagers, parents especially, is not be reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Take that breath.
Yeah.
Take that breath. And to look for what the child is doing, and to look to what the adult you disagree with is doing. I think Reinhold Niebuhr made a point at one time, one of my favorite theologians of the 20th century. I need to be aware of the truth in my neighbor's falsehood and the falsehood in my own truth. That my position is limited. I may support a particular presidential candidate, and I may think that that candidate is a much better choice than the other, but I have no clear understanding at this moment what the outcome of electing either will be on the world stage. They may have different policies regarding climate change and LGBTQ issues and other things, but we don't know what the future will bring in terms of the global condition, whether we elect, in quotes, the wrong candidate and the right. And that always gives me a slight bit of pause, even though I know what side I'm on, at least politically here. It keeps me from being too dismissive of people who disagree with me or hold different positions.
Yeah. There's a quote coming to mind that I cannot remember the name of the individual, but they wrote, I think it was during or just after the Holocaust on that event, and they said between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is your freedom. Yes. To make a choice on what that response is going to be. And it feels like that space is getting so smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think the mystics help us broaden that space out a little bit again.
Well, and I think you're talking about Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, that the one freedom we have is how to respond to situations and not get caught up in them. But I think you're right, because one of the things, again, the mystics I talk about in Homegrown mystics are not fleeing the world, but they're looking at the world from a wider perspective. Yeah. A little bit like Theodore Parker's comment about the moral arc of history, that we can't fully discern it, and it is a long arc. And Plato, the great philosopher, said that time is the moving image of eternity, and that to me has always stuck, that we're part of something much larger than ourselves, and our plans are part of something much larger than ourselves. And we don't really know in the midst of time what a winning or losing cause is. We only know what we believe them to be. And that doesn't keep us from going out like Rabbi Heschel and marching with Martin Luther King and then saying, I felt like my legs were praying. While I was marching. It doesn't keep us from doing those things that are near and dear to us, but it's the long haul of history. It's a bit like Martin Luther King in his last talk, says, I don't know what the future brings. Mortality is, longevity is a good thing, but I have seen the promised land. I know that God is at work in the world. Glory, hallelujah. And you wonder whether he was not unaware that there would be a risk in the next day or two to his life. But it's bigger than us. And I think one of the things mystics give us is a certain generosity of time, a certain generosity of spaciousness. They may go back to work and work 18 hours a day like Dorothy Day, working with the poor of the city and then going out and getting arrested the next day. But there's also a spaciousness, the truth is marching on, even though it's not always marching very quickly.
Yeah, that is for sure. We're taking a quick break here mid-show to let you know of an opportunity that Choir is offering. Are you deconstructing your faith? It's tough, believe me, I know, I've done it. But what if you didn't have to do it alone? Imagine having guides like Jim Palmer, Kristen Dumais, Jennifer Knapp, Brad Jerzak, Brian Zahn, Paul Young, and more by your side to help. I know I would have loved that on my journey. Well, now you can. Head on over to choiracademy.com, link will be in the show notes, and register for their Square 2 class using the promo code LIMINAL, and you will get 10% off. This course and community are designed to help you navigate your journey with wisdom and support, all because you're a fan of the Liminal Living podcast. And now back to our show. There seems to be, like, I have my mind made up about the direction we ought to be going, and the candidate that should be elected, and I have all my reasons and everything, very neatly organized inside of my brain. And then I will articulate those to somebody from the other perspective, and they will have the same critiques I do of their stance, but for my stance. And how do we be aware of the truth in someone else's falsehood and the falsehood in our own truth, when sometimes we're saying the exact same thing about each other's stances, kind of verbatim almost?
Well, yes, certainly almost the mere opposite, you might say. Mm-hmm. And you're obviously dealing with a fairly erudite conversation partners who actually give you a reason for their positions. Quite often the people will just simply blurt something out and call somebody a communist for no apparent reason, or without any understanding what they're talking about. And I think, again, the conversation is key. Our task is not necessarily to convince somebody even about our faith, but to share our story, our experience as a provocative possibility. I'm certainly doing that in relationship to the political reality of people on the left who may choose not to vote, or who are disillusioned, perhaps some of them, by what Robert Kennedy Jr. has done, is that I will say, well, here's what I believe is a good choice at this point in time, and consider this. Consider this. I think we can lobby, and the mystics do too. I mean, John Muir worked to get national parks. Mm-hmm. Black Elk tried to help his people survive in a very adverse world. Thoreau protested the war. Abraham Heschel marched against Vietnam and war in Vietnam, and makes a comment that he was having trouble praying because every time he wanted to close his eyes and pray, he saw the bodies of the dead at our hands in the way that some people see Israeli children or children in Gaza every time they pray. I think that you can be heavenly minded and earthly good. And when I talk about heavenly minded, I'm not talking about escape. I'm talking about a type of stature that can hear the other, hold your own viewpoint, change your viewpoint when you've been presented with larger perspectives than your own, and they're always larger perspectives than our own. And hold the tension in love, you might say. Hold the tension in love, hold the tension in wisdom.
Yeah. I just talked with David Gushee this week, and he helped broaden the understanding of even my own perspective, not just someone else's perspective, but he broadened my own perspective where, we're talking very clearly about, the Trump administration being a threat to democracy itself.
Yes.
And how I would do that is put I would put Trump as the threat itself. And what he did was he helped me see it's the ideas that are behind it, of the dismantling of the rules of the game that we're all playing. And he said sometimes in democracy you lose, and you have to, lose graciously, but it's about preserving the rules. And it took the people out of the the argument, and it kind of diffused it for me for a minute and said, oh, it's not about, Harris versus Trump or,
Yes.
This whole thing. It's about preserving the rules of how we said we want to play the game. And the other side understands they don't really want those rules preserved because they have an entirely different vision that
Yes.
is not going to be the popular, the popular, it's not going to gain popular votes. So in order to get their vision, they have to dismantle the democracy in order to get it through. I didn't see it that way until I talked with him, and he helped expand my own understanding of it.
Yes, and even though we may view that as nefarious, it's important to sometimes get out of the personalities. And certainly David Gushee is a very wise person in this area, is to get out of the personalities. We can focus on somebody like Donald Trump. I have to pray for him daily for my sake, not just for his sake, for my sake, that even though my body has a visceral response to him, I have to pray that I don't lose my soul in responding to what I believe are his own faults and his own self-interest, narcissism, so on and so forth. And if you have, in order to protect your own soul, you have to look larger, and that makes you capable of perhaps affecting change that does not harm or harm significantly those whom you oppose. I mean, I think it's the group The Who, if you remember The Who, in one of their songs, "Here Comes the New Boss, Just Like the Old Boss." And so often in revolutionary movements, the group that claims to be speaking for freedom replaces the group that is considered the oligarchy and the dictatorial group and becomes somewhat like them.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly it's the case even in our own. Again, I can say about the progressive and leftward movement. You're not going to solve the Gaza, Israel, Hamas, Israeli conflict with hate. And I'm just looking for an ally wherever I can find one. My ally is someone I don't have to agree with totally.
Mm-hmm.
I figure in that area, if somebody's seeking a ceasefire, whether they're more conservative than me or more liberal than me, we're on the same side at some level. If somebody's seeking the release of the hostages and the fact that no child should be frightened in Israel or Gaza or Lebanon or the West Bank, we're at one point on the same side. We may have different tools to get there, but we have to acknowledge when we have something in common. There are people who want war. There are people who want war, but it's a precious thing when you find somebody who's opposing the war, even if they have a slightly more liberal or more conservative attitude or a less ideological or more ideological attitude than you do.
Yeah.
God deliver us from abstractions. God deliver us from ideology. Because ideology and abstraction, like fundamentalism and literalism, is deadly. It puts ideas as the reality rather than persons who love, hate, experience joy and sorrow. That's where the life is, even when you have to do work in government. And in one of my other books, Mystics in Action, I talk about Dag Hammarskjöld. People my age, at least, remember him as the person who really defined the General Secretary of the United Nations and died in 1961, plane crash in Africa. It was only after he died that people discovered how deeply spiritual he was. And his spirituality, in a very understated way, led his work as the General Secretary of the United Nations. But as General Secretary of the United Nations, sometimes you couldn't achieve the perfect solution. You had to achieve a solution when fewer people were killed rather than more. sometimes the Hippocratic oath doesn't work. First, do no harm. Sometimes in the affairs of people and nations, do less harm.
Yeah, that'd be a better place to start than being frozen and not being able to fulfill it at all.
I know that Howard Thurman talks about protest may shock. He uses that term, shock the oppressor. But the shock is not intended to destroy them, but to wake them up and to give them greater empathy.
Yeah.
To help them walk a mile in the shoes of the person who's just trying to catch the bus in the morning, or the person whose child has just been shot by a police officer, or the person who's just had their home foreclosed because somebody made a signature somewhere to say, okay, this is what's going to happen. I think that the challenge is still to love your enemies, in quotes, so they're no longer your enemies.
Yeah.
Donald Trump and I, in 30 years, neither one of us is likely to be alive. And so for me, in relating to Donald Trump, for example, it's back to the psalmist. This is the day that God has made. I'll rejoice and be glad in it. This day I'm going to do the best I can to make a positive difference in the world. And I'm going to pray for Donald Trump that he finds, as the Buddhist Bodhisattva says, that all beings experience happiness. And that's a big prayer to make, to do that. It was the challenge. Again, one of my favorite books in the Bible was the book of Jonah, and where Jonah has to, for various reasons, he doesn't want to go to Nineveh. And one of them is that Nineveh has knocked the heck out of his country. And he's a half-hearted prophet in some ways, but how do you root for the salvation of the oppressor?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to. Otherwise, you're the new boss that's just like the old boss.
Yeah, that happened in the intertestamental period when the Jews achieved independence from, the Greeks.
Yes.
That had overtaken them. And then that ruling class of the Jews became so oppressive when the Romans came to town. They were just like, please, we'll take it.
Yes.
And then they hated them. But it was just swapping oppressors at that point.
Yes. And so those of us who want positive political change have to take these mystics seriously. Not just the ones I detail in Homegrown Mysticism or mystics in action, but mystics seldom bear grudges. And mystics are willing, like Francis of Assisi, to cross the border during the Crusades and visit a sultan, a Muslim sultan. He wanted to convert him, probably, and the sultan wanted to convert Francis. They had their own motives, but the fact that he crossed the border in a time in which people were promised eternal life for killing Muslims or killing Christians was an act of radical love and radical transformation and breaking down the barriers.
Yeah. Yeah, he's one of my favorite saints, and I love his prayer. I think that the St. Francis prayer is really like that defines what I'm trying to do.
Yes.
That whole St. Francis prayer, don't seek to be loved, but to love, not
Yes.
to be understood as to understand. That whole, like, putting the emphasis not on projecting yourself into people's minds and hearts so that they understand you better, but to really delve into their hearts and souls is, Emily Dickinson, you quoted her, the soul should always stand ajar, ready to welcome the ecstatic experience. Like, I think St. Francis's prayer is a way to keep the door ajar. To
yes.
experience someone else.
Yes, and it's certainly one of my practices on my morning walk is to some time in the course of the walk, just simply say, Lord, make me an instrument of peace. and remind myself at different times throughout the day that I have this life today, and I have a life of privilege, and that most of my annoyances don't really matter. If, as I often say to my friends, if this is the worst that happened today to me, it's a pretty good day. We're not happy if the power goes out, mind you. And, we may have to find some ice to put in our freezer or find a friend who has electricity if we don't happen to have a generator. We don't have them, and very many of them in Washington, D.C., because we don't expect the power to go out until it does, and it does. But, to realize that I have the choice, you've invoked Viktor Frankl earlier on, to be an agent of peace. And that's one of the things I impress on young people, especially those in my own family. You have the choice of how to respond to what your parents say. You have a choice of how to respond to what the coach says. They don't have to determine how you feel. And I think that's one of the interesting things about the mystics. They were both the ones that, at least I relate in this book, were the most communal people and the most solitary people. And their solitude, as the philosopher Whitehead says, the religion is born of solitude, of taking your own counsel, but that solitude is also empathetic in its experience of the pain and joy of others. I was just reading something. I'm doing a little trajectory here, but it's not averse to our conversation, from one of my colleagues, Jay McDaniel, who was my graduate school roommate now 50 years ago, when I first started grad school, has a daily blog from Open Horizons, and he was talking in the most recent one about the experiences of dogs and how, with my hound, and you may have seen him walk in here. Let's see.
I did see.
There he is.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
you can register his joy immediately. If I say certain words, he's just up and at 'em and ready to go. With humans, it's usually much more subtle once they get to be 10 or 12 years old. But each moment we can contribute to the beauty of the world, as Mother Teresa says, now Saint Teresa. We can do something beautiful for God, which she really means you do something beautiful for God by doing something beautiful for God's creatures. That it really is, as John Lennon says, the instant karma. You'll see it registered in your bones. So I've lived by that practice, and I think again, the whole notion of having the door ajar is a matter of grace and grit, probably, or grace and intentionality. The door is ajar by our own intentionality, as well as the deeper realities of life. And our own intentionality, again, as Mary Oliver says, is to pay attention. Pay attention, or as Buechner says, Frederick Buechner says, listen to your life. Listen to your life. And then, as Parker Palmer responds, this great couplet, listen to your life, let your life speak. But if you're listening to your life and listening to the impact you make on others, even simple things like, again, I'm a fellow who's been married 45 years and have the joys and challenges that come from it. But I realize how simple, unimportant nothings change the world in a relationship. Taking the laundry basket from our upper level to the two flights down to our lower level. Doing the laundry, doing the dishes, saying a kind word, acting like you don't hear something, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. The key to a good marriage is a little bit of problem with your hearing on occasion. Letting it pass, not having to notice everything in a negative way when and counting your blessings. And I think the Heschel makes a comment about in his book on the prophets, the 2-volume book, and it's truly along with Walter Brueggemann's Prophetic Imagination are really the best books on the prophets. He says that if you save a soul, it's as if you save the universe. And I always thought that that was too generous, just like I think the 12-step movements one day at a time is too generous. I'm living one moment at a time.
Yeah.
And if I save a moment, I'm contributing a little bit like the butterfly effect to the health of the cosmos. Even something as silly. Here I am, a man who's 71 years old, and I've kind of become the embodiment incarnation of my father. My father was a wonderful man, and I am because of him, Ubuntu. But in his retirement, he always went to the grocery store and got to know the checkers and the people who worked there. So after my morning walk, which is usually around 5:30, I walk about 3 or 4 miles every morning. If I need something, I'll go to the local supermarket and pick up, that's the milk and the eggs or what the grandchildren have just eaten, like the locusts is around the house. So, you have to replenish things. But I've gotten in the habit of just getting to know the greengrocer and the people stalkers and they know me now and I know them. And if I contribute as Emily Dickinson says, if I can help someone on the way, my living won't be in vain, and the world is saved. If certain politicians had early on in life had somebody who put their hand around on their shoulder and said, "Attaboy, you're going to do okay. You don't have to do this to be loved. You can just simply be yourself," the national dialogue would have been very different. And we could be the answer to somebody's prayer, and that's the other aspect of the mystic is that, and I'm reading some of this through my own philosophical viewpoint of process theology, but we could be the answer of somebody's prayer. We're getting all these hints in the simplest things, in how you treat your dog and cat, in what you do when somebody cuts in front of you when you're driving. I don't know if somebody cutting in front of me warrants a big blast on my horn. I hear that all the time in my neighborhood. They may be more polite where you are, but the deed has already been done. I don't need a right to impact now to lean on my horn. Quite often when somebody does that, I just take my hand out and wave at them and say, "Yeah, I saw you. It's okay." Because once in a while I do something stupid like that and don't see something and pull out in front of somebody, not with any malevolence, just by not being mindful.
Yeah, I like what Thomas Merton, he calls recollection.
Yes.
Where he says you need to recollect your distracted existence over space and time and geography back into the present moment.
Yes.
Because you dilute your consciousness in this moment if you're worrying about what hasn't happened yet next week or regretting what happened last week. And, you multiply that over 10 things that you're regretting and worrying about, and you take your distracted existence and attention and you place it all over time and space and geography, and you find that you don't really have the emotional capacity to take on this moment because you're off some other place that doesn't exist yet or no longer exists because it's in the past.
Yes. And to live in this holy moment, knowing you have to ponder the next step you're going to take, but not letting the next step determine. And that's one of the reasons I use that other mantra from the Psalms. This is the day God has made. This is the only day I've got right now. This is the moment God has made. This is the moment. And again, these mystics, live in the moment and yet have the long haul view. And they keep them in balance. You delight in the grasshopper, and you march for climate change, to end climate change. You play with your dog, and then you go out and protest the war in Gaza and Israel, or discrimination, or inability to have resources of people, and both of them are important. How to hold this holy moment like none other in the universe, with thinking long term as well, and thinking that you're part of a bigger story, and what you do can have a role in saving the nation. Maybe we need more people who can find a way to talk without yelling across the border, and discover that even the person with the red MAGA hat, or the person who's occupying the president's office at Columbia University, there is no other. They are part of my reality, and I'm part of theirs. And we're not disconnected. We're connected. We might still have laws, and we might still have borders that we protect and monitor. And I think we should, by the way. But yet we would find ways to ensure the people coming from the South and other places would have something to eat and be treated humanely. Maybe we'd go back south and work to solve problems so at the root, so they wouldn't be at the end of the chain. You can think big and be a mystic. You can be active and be a mystic.
I like that. I like you quoted Mary Oliver. She's probably one of my favorite poets. My wife she introduced me to Mary Oliver's work, and it's wonderful. And you actually quote one of her quotes that I use when I preach at a funeral.
Yes.
And I do about 30, 40 funerals a year, so I use it quite a lot.
Yes.
And you said, to live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends upon it, and when the time comes to let it go, let it go. I always read that at a funeral, and I let people know, there's things that we need to hang on to, memories and, the mementos and the essence of who they were to us, but then we got to let go. They're not physically here anymore. And I say that act of letting go is what allows life to come and rest again in your possession, because you can't receive anything in a closed hand.
Yes.
And that kind of points back to that the door of the soul being ajar.
Yes.
Like we have to have that humility of the open hand, which I think is a very like a Buddhist spirituality, very much so, that allows life to pass through our open hand without clamping down in fear of, I like this, I might lose it.
Yes.
Kind of a moment.
Yes. And it involves really the sense of both the long haul. These are the things I cherish, that I'm going to do all I can in response to global warming. But I'm also going to rejoice in the day I have while I'm doing everything regarding global warming. And some of this involves a trust in God, a trust in the universe, whatever term you want to use, Tom. It's a trust that it isn't all on your shoulders. There is something on our shoulders, and we do shape the universe to some extent every moment of our lives. However, we aren't the only ones. And for those who believe in some sort of spiritual presence much larger than ourselves, I don't happen to believe that presence controls everything and moves all the strings of our lives, but that's present before us and after us and through us. Then there's a sense in which our victories, we don't have to crow too much about them, and our defeats, we don't have to lose heart. There is the moral arc, again, to quote Theodore Parker, will continue. Even if we think we're going to slow it down, it will still continue.
Yeah, that's the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice.
Yes.
But it's long. The arc is long.
The arc is long, and it sometimes just simply stops for a while. Or
Yeah.
we slow it down. We slow it down. We can't
Yeah.
we can't stop the sun from shining, but we can turn away from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's still shining.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Exodus when the people were suffering under the oppressive, empire of Egypt. It took, over 400 years
Yes.
for that moral arc to finally bend and Moses to show up.
Yes.
400 years.
Yes.
And, I hear people say, yes, of course, we founded the country on genocide and on slavery and all these other things, but I didn't do that. That wasn't me. I shouldn't be at fault. I shouldn't be punished. They have that whole,
Yes.
They're adopting something without really realizing that the moral arc might just be coming closer in their lifetime.
Yes.
Not putting the blame of slavery upon their shoulders, but our forefathers and mothers did. That was a reality. And it could just be time for that arc to come and finally meet the ground in our day and age. As, Daniel said, he's repenting on behalf of the nation.
Yes.
He's not saying I totally screwed up. He's a blameless man before God, according to his description in the scriptures.
Sure.
But here he is saying, we have really messed this up. We have really screwed this up, and we need to make things right on behalf of people that he might not have even been in his generation, but here he is in exile, and that moral arc is now coming to a completion in his lifetime. Yes. And he is grasping it and owning it and saying, it is my turn to do something with this, without adopting it into his ego and taking a shot of like, oh my gosh, I'm guilty of something and now I'm anxious about it, so I need to deflect it, or,
And so, I think sometimes that people, we mistake guilt from responsibility.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
We may not have perpetrated certain actions, but we're alive today in a nation and on a planet where those actions still are affecting people. And the desire to erase history, our own history of trauma or a national trauma, is, from every indicator, something that's unhealthy. From every indicator, and perhaps we can only take so much truth at a time, but defensiveness is not going to help us, and denial is not going to help us. Some form of creative transformation in which we again have the stature to embrace the past and embrace where we are today and how we feel about the past, and our fears as well as hopes. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight, as the Christmas hymn says. Embrace the fact that we're worried about some of what has been done and what its impact will be on us. It shouldn't paralyze us from doing what can be done in the present moment. Mm-hmm. History matters. The healing of history matters. We can't exactly get a therapist for the nation, but I think every nation needs its own type of therapy, not just the United States. We are just one nation in the world. Any other nation left with the same devices might do exactly what we have done with marginalized people. As a matter of fact, they have. And,
yes, historically they do. Empires do that. And
so that being the case, repentance does not necessarily mean throwing in the towel. It means the opportunity to be a new nation, to have new values, to trust that we can heal some of the wounds and find some way to comfort the past that still is present.
Yeah. I think that takes an embodiment of not just thinking ideas about things, but we're going to have to actually embody this. And one of you have Maya Angelou as one of your mystics, and I think she's the sassiest mystic in the whole. I love her work. It is so good. What does that embodiment, you think, look like? How did Maya Angelou embody that prophetic, mystical spirit for change in the world? What did you see when you studied about her?
And obviously, a lot of people might not put her in a book of mystics, but I felt her spirituality was deep. And if you look at her story, and it's a very complicated story of trauma, of making good choices and bad choices, of being imperfectly perfect, you might say, and still, as she would say, a phenomenal woman. I think for her, as she says throughout her work, it's a sense of gratitude for the mere fact of living. She tells the story of one of her teachers. He was both a music teacher and a spiritual teacher, where she came in down and out as a young woman, and he kind of took her to task and said, "Write down the things that you have that you're thankful for." And she initially resisted that, and yet when she got down to writing it, she discovered the blessings she had. And the blessings of an imperfect life, the blessings of an imperfect person, the blessings of being surrounded by imperfect people that did the best they could. And she often commented that whenever she feels down, she gives thanks for this day. As they say in many African-American gospel-style churches, I thank you, God, for waking me up this morning. You didn't have to. I don't know if God's that determinative, but I again say a similar prayer every morning. I thank God that I woke up this morning. During the pandemic at its worst, which with the first few months of it, where we had no idea whether if somebody coughed 50 feet from us we would die. You remember those days?
Oh yeah.
We were frightened about everything. We had the groceries delivered and then we washed them down. At least we did in my house.
I remember doing that.
Yep. And I was walking. Still took my daily walk on the beach at Cape Cod, and there was just a few of us there. And I'd crossed paths with this guy, and we'd give ourselves a wide berth. We saw each other. One of us moved to the other side of the road, and he'd say, I'd say something, well, how are you? And said, doing well. How are you? And I'd respond, I woke up, and now I have a whole day full of possibility. And I think for Angelou, it was a sense of the embodiment of those possibilities in a life in which you can take chances and, to use the popular language of today, leave nothing on the table. I mean, she was somebody who really, at least in my mind, didn't leave much on the table.
Yeah.
And she let the divine work in and through her to achieve all that was possible for her to achieve as a writer, as a dancer, as an actress, as a poet, as a political leader, as a person who'd grown up with trauma, who'd done all sorts of things on the wrong side of the tracks, some people would think. And yet here she has this wonderful life. And it came from a combination of grace and grit and a willingness to take a chance on God and to realize that the powers of the universe were with you. And I think to push you forward to where you might not thought you could go.
Yeah, I find myself, I vacillate between gratitude, being thankful that I woke up, that I didn't ask to be here. I was kind of given to this world, so I must somehow be a gift to this world.
Yes.
I vacillate between that and apologizing for my existence and trying to not be, too much of a burden on society and wanting to make people happy. And I seem to vacillate between the two of, apologetic existence versus a grateful one. And I'm most at peace when I'm on the grateful side, for sure.
And you don't want to call Jesus a liar. So Jesus says, you're the light of the world. Let your light shine. As a pastor, and I didn't often do children's sermons. I had a colleague who did most of them, who was in charge of the children's ministries and other things. I would usually, at the end of the children's sermon, say something like, God loves you, we love you, you matter, and you can do something beautiful with your life. And I figured if they got those four things, they would be doing okay in life. And you matter was the one that I guess I say to myself and maybe to you, is that if God says that you matter, then where you are, you belong. And where you are, you have an absolute right to be there, and everybody else has an absolute right to be in the place they are at this moment. I like the phrase, one of my favorite phrases from, we don't really know where it originated. You find it in Nicholas of Cusa and Bonaventure. God is a circle or an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. The center is right where you are. This will preach. The center is right where you are. You have a right to be there. I remember that poem from my college years, Desiderata. You're a child of the universe, no less than the birds and the trees. You have a right to be here. Even if you were, as the existentialists say, thrown into the universe, and we're all to some degree thrown into the universe in our families of origin, we, at least unless we believe some clearly intentional process of reincarnation. And I don't think the only one who actually believed that philosophically, and he did it in a mythic way, was Plato, who believed that the souls chose their type of life right before they were born. And of course, they drunk the waters of forgetfulness in the same way that in reincarnation and transmigration and other traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, we drink the waters of forgetfulness, and may not ever figure out why we were born there. But here we are. Look out, world, as a poster we put on our son's wall when he was a small boy. He's now 44. Look out, world, here I come. Look out, world, here I come. And here I come doesn't mean you're going gangbusters. It doesn't mean you're going to demolish the people who disagree with you, but you're just going to occupy your space with gracefulness and love and do what you can to do something beautiful in the world. I mean, these mystics were all people that in their own way sought to make an impact, not out of ego, but they realized that when you are called, when mystical experiences lead to movement. Mystical experiences lead to action. Isaiah is the wonderful example, and Moses is the wonderful example. You have this wonderful mystical experience, and then you get a job. Who's going to go to Egypt? Who's going to go to Egypt? Or the good Lord says as if the good Lord's looking in this direction and talking to no one in particular, who are we going to send? Of course, there's only one wrong person in the room, even though God's looking around somewhere else. He doesn't want to put too much pressure on Isaiah. And Isaiah, comes out of his stupor. It says, here I am, send me. Mysticism always leads to mission in these mystics I'm talking about. And even, truth be told, the monastics that are involved in living in monasteries, I think of the poor sisters of Clare. There are old tales that say that the planet is surviving and doing as well as it can because there are a group of people praying. And of course, when she was older and unable to march and protest anymore, Dorothy Day says, well, I can't come to the protest, but my vocation now is prayer. And we don't know, there's no way of telling, to be honest, what the impact of our prayers are, but I believe at some level they have some role in correcting the imbalances of the world. Some role of pushing things toward greater health rather than brokenness. I'm not sure I use the term prayer warriors as some of my more conservative friends do, but people who soak the world with prayer are doing some good. Thomas of Celano, in his biography of Francis, says that his life became a prayer. And I keep reminding of myself of that every day in my own aspirations. What would it mean for my life to be a prayer today? As I take my dog on a walk, as I respond with patience rather than impatience to a domestic situation, as I see the fearful child in a prevaricating politician and pray for them, as I seek to be, as you noted earlier on, an instrument of peace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have loved this conversation. It's been so fun. And we've gone an hour and 10 minutes.
It's almost nap time for me. I'm a 71-year-old man. I
had my espresso. So
I woke up at 4 a.m. So it's some people have only been awake 10 hours and they're ready to go to sleep again. But I'm ready to turn on a mystery and fall asleep now.
Oh, well, great. Before you go, how can our listeners connect with you and the work you're doing? Where do you want to send them?
Okay, I do have a website, and you can contact me through that. People can, www.drbruceepperly.com. If you go on any of the search engines and just type Dr. Bruce Epperly, that usually is the top one that comes up. I've checked that this morning. And there's a contact on that. I get a fair amount of conversation that comes to me out of the blue, so to speak, and I do my best to respond to it. I always make the offer, and so far I've been able to deliver. If somebody this is an unpaid solicitation here. If somebody decides to use a book of mine for a book group, and if I have the time, I'll show up for a cameo.
That's cool.
And half an hour to talk about what it is. I mean, one of the joys of having a less structured life, as I do these days, is that I can choose to do what I feel is best given my gifts. And I certainly welcome conversation. I also am on Facebook, and people can certainly contact me through that venue as well.
Okay, well, I will make sure to put those links in the show notes so people can just click on them and find you, and it'll be that easy.
Well, it's been great.
This was a wonderful conversation. I definitely want to have you. I mean, we got 90 books to choose from. We can have 90 conversations.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We'll have to talk about that sometime along the way. I love doing these. I love doing these because I never know exactly what's going to come up. And all of us have our own spiels, but it's different every time. Even if it's a similar subject, it's different because today is a new day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, Tom, for having me. And, I look forward to further adventures.
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely keep this possibility open for some more conversations in the future. I've loved this one, so definitely going to have you on again. Well, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Liminal Living Podcast. I hope you found this conversation with Dr. Bruce Epperly as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more thought-provoking discussions, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends and community. Your support really helps us grow and reach more people who are searching for deeper meaning and connection in their lives. And don't forget to check out our YouTube page where you can watch video versions of our episodes and catch exclusive content over there, little short clips that we put together. And engage with us in the comments there or down here in Facebook. So we love hearing from you, and it's a great way to continue the conversation. You can also connect with us on social media where we share updates behind the scenes. I don't want to share behind the scenes moments. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Liminal Living Podcast. I hope you found this conversation with Dr. Bruce Epperly as insightful and inspiring and uplifting as I did. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more thought-provoking discussions, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends and community. because your support really helps us grow and reach more people who are searching for deeper meaning and connection in their lives. So don't forget to check out our YouTube page where you can watch the video versions of our episodes and also watch little 1-minute clips that we post over there in the YouTube Shorts section. You can also, and feel free to engage with us in the comments if you're going to be nice and not be a troll. You can do that here on wherever you found this, Facebook or YouTube or wherever you're at. Go ahead and like it on the socials. So thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, keep exploring the liminal spaces where that transformation happens. Stay curious, stay open. Peace out.